Hello everyone and welcome to my Stellaris Guide to Espionage. I'm your host, Colors Fade. Espionage was introduced with the 3.0 patch, which coincided with the Nemesis DLC. The 3.0 update introduced the core mechanic of espionage into the game and provided one operation: gather information. The Nemesis DLC introduced all the other espionage operations you see here. Personally, I'm not a fan of Paradox locking all the other espionage operations behind a paid DLC, but that's a discussion for another time. Right now, I just want to focus on the mechanics of espionage so you can get the most out of it, should you choose to use it. Espionage can only be performed on other empires. It cannot be used on organic life forms, mercenary factions, or other non-empire entities like the Artisan Troop. And it cannot be used against pre-faster-than-light empires either, because that's the role of the observation post. To perform espionage, you first have to assign an envoy as a spy master, at which point you'll immediately begin to improve your infiltration level. Your infiltration level automatically goes up against the target empire as soon as you assign a spy master, and it keeps going up a little bit each month until it reaches its max level. As for its purpose, it determines which operations you can perform. You can launch any operation once the infiltration level exceeds the required number for that operation, which will cause the text to turn from red to white. We'll get to some of the specific operations later in this guide, but first we need to discuss Intel. Intel reflects your overall knowledge of a target empire, from their level of science and research to their government, fleet power, and economic strength. To learn about a target empire, you must launch the Gather Information operation. This, as mentioned earlier, is the only operation you can perform without the Nemesis DLC. As it turns out, this is also the most important operation you can execute. The reason for this, and really the whole reason I think espionage is worth doing in the first place, is because with enough intel, you can inspect enemy fleets and see how their ships are outfitted. Being able to inspect enemy ships is extremely important in Stellaris, because without knowing how your enemy fleets are configured, you won't know how to effectively counter them. Countering enemy fleets is the best way to give yourself an edge in combat. For instance, if an enemy is predominantly using energy weapons, which do more damage to armor and hull, then it makes sense for you to equip a lot of shields on your ships, because your enemy's weapons will not be as strong against shields. However, you can't inspect enemy fleets if you don't have high intel on that empire. So for that reason alone, I recommend using espionage and launching the Gather Information operation on any empires you suspect you're eventually going to go to war with. Now, something else I need to explain here is how your intel level works. As you perform the Gather Information operation over and over, you'll gain more intel on that empire. Something I want to stress here is that your intel level is an equilibrium value. It's not a max value or a hard cap. You can exceed this value, but if you do, it will automatically begin to decline until it reaches this equilibrium value. Thus, while you perform successful Gather Information operations, your intel will slowly rise to the equilibrium value, and if you exceed this value, it will begin declining until it reaches the equilibrium again. At all times, your intel level is trying to reach its equilibrium. To launch any operation, you simply need to select it and then launch it. Operations proceed in stages. Some operations, like Gather Information, only have one stage, while other operations, like Acquire Asset, have multiple stages. An operation will only be successful when all stages have completed. Once per month, the game rolls a 10-sided die to determine the success of the current stage of the operation. This dice roll is then modified by several numbers. First, it's modified by your empire's skill bonus, which is determined by a combination of your empire's civics, traditions, technologies, ascension perks, leaders' skills, and any matching asset you are using. We'll talk more about assets in a bit because they're kind of important. Next, the dice roll is modified by the difficulty of the operation. Each operation has a base difficulty that is then modified by two more numbers: code breaking and encryption. If you are performing an operation on a target empire, then you are on the offensive side of the equation, in which case you are using your code breaking skill to modify the difficulty of the operation. The target empire is then on defense, so they're using encoding to also modify the difficulty. After both modifiers are applied, we get a final difficulty number, which is then applied to the 10-sided dice roll. Finally, we have insights. Each time the 10-sided dice is rolled, the game looks at the final result and grants insight to that stage of the operation. This is the final modifier to the dice roll. Depending on the roll, you will be granted +1 or +2 insights, and these insight values stack while the stage is ongoing. This stacking bonus is then applied to the final result the next time the dice is rolled. Insight is basically the game's way of making sure that an espionage operation actually completes and doesn't go on indefinitely. Imagine you're in the early game, and your empire isn't very good at espionage yet. You don't have any assets, you haven't unlocked any bonuses through research, and you haven't advanced any of the espionage traditions or hired any leaders with espionage bonuses. Without anything affecting your dice roll, an operation could go on forever, constantly failing its rolls and thus never completing. But because of insight and its stacking nature, it becomes possible for a stage to make a little bit of progress each month, which then affects the next month's dice roll. The game then nicely wraps all of this up in a single number, the percentage chance for a breakthrough, which is when the stage will complete. When stage is complete, one of two things can happen. Either the dice roll will be sufficient and the stage will complete silently, moving on to the next stage, or completing the operation entirely if it's the final stage, or you may have to react to an event. Choices you make with these events can be temporary or have lasting effects for the operation. In some cases, you might be saddled with a penalty due to the difficulty of your dice roll for a few months, or, in more dramatic cases, you may have to abort the operation altogether to prevent a diplomatic disaster. I mentioned earlier that one way to modify your empire's skill bonus is to utilize an asset. Assets can add a +4 to your skill bonus roll, which is significant when we're talking about a 10-sided die. However, they do this if and only if their operation modifiers match the operation's category. For example, gather information falls under the subterfuge category. Our asset, Gograth Whipsail, gets a +4 operation bonus to subterfuge and economy operations. Our other asset, Coral Alvilda, has a +4 bonus to manipulation and military. If we assign Coral to the gather information operation, we wouldn't get any bonus. But if we assign Gograth Whipsail to the gather information operation, we will get a +4 bonus. It should go without saying then that if you want to perform operations against the target empire, you should first acquire assets. Matching assets will make all of your operations much easier to successfully complete. Now that we understand the mechanics of how espionage works, it basically boils down to a monthly dice roll, with various modifiers increasing our chances of positive outcomes. Let's talk about some of the more valuable operations you can perform, and whether I think it's even worthwhile to invest in espionage at all. Truth be told, you can play the entire game without ever using espionage, and you'll be fine. For most of the galaxy's major threats, you can simply consult the wiki to determine the loadouts that enemy ships use. If you want to effectively counter the mining drones, void worms, the various crisis actors, the wiki is your go-to source. But if you want to effectively counter other empires, which can have random loadouts, or you want to be a major player in the Galactic Senate, I would strongly suggest investing in the espionage traditions, choosing espionage research operations, and gathering assets. I found that after pumping my empire's code-breaking skill and using assets, my operations had a far easier time completing. It was pretty nice to see how effective espionage could be once all the modifiers were in play. And it wasn't that difficult to achieve that state either. It's not like you have to focus your empire purely on espionage to get the most out of it. As to the specific operations that I think have value, I've already mentioned that gather information is the most useful one. It allows you to inspect the ships of enemy empires, and it doesn't require the Nemesis DLC. When your intel is maxed out, you'll see all the target empire's fleets and planets. You'll know everything there is to know about them, at least for a little while, until your intel grows stale and falls back to its equilibrium value. For this reason, I think gather information is definitely worth doing. Now, if you do want to do more espionage and you purchase the Nemesis DLC, then I think you should definitely make use of Acquire Asset and gather as many assets as possible. Asset modifiers make all of your operations much easier. That +4 is significant. Additionally, some operations will require you to burn an asset, meaning you'll lose that asset once the operation completes. So it pays to be able to acquire multiple assets so you always have that +4 bonus. Third, I think Extort Favors has some value if you want to be a major player in the Galactic Senate. If you want to manipulate the Senate into passing certain galactic laws or preventing other laws from being passed, you should basically have this operation going at all times. As soon as it completes, launch it again. can. You'll want to target the empires with the greatest diplomatic weight so that their favors have the most impact, and then extort favors from them constantly. This will help you pass or fail the resolutions that are important to you. Prepare sleeper cells is another operation that is useful in a very specific situation. If you don't have enough envoys to assign as spy masters to all the empires you want to spy on, you can build up a spy network on a particular empire and launch the Prepare Sleeper Cells operation. This basically places a halt to all espionage operations on this empire while also preserving your infiltration level. This then allows you to reassign that envoy to a different empire as a spy master. Then, later on, when you want to perform more operations against this empire, you can reassign a spy master to it and start where you left off, with your infiltration level intact. As for the rest of the operations, I think they're all pretty weak. Steal technology sounds like it should be awesome, but in practice it's not that good. At the end of a successful operation, you're going to be given a choice to either burn your asset and gain a bonus to your own research for a limited amount of time, or earn the option to research a new technology and gain 30% progress in that technology. Here you can see the Interstellar Campaigns research option becomes available to us, and we get 30% progress in that technology. We don't actually steal that technology outright. The other downside of steal technology is that regardless of which choice you make at the end, whether you grant yourself a research bonus or gain 30% progress in a new tech, you will still have to wait 6 years before you can attempt another steal technology operation. So for all these reasons, I don't think steal technology is worth your time. Armed privateers would be useful in the early game when you want to weaken an empire prior to declaring war on them, but unfortunately it's the most difficult operation to pull off, requiring the highest infiltration level. By the time you can effectively use this operation with a matching asset, you probably already have a strong enough navy to simply win an outright war against whoever you want to go to war with. Smear campaign and spark diplomatic incident require far too much time to be effective. Theoretically, you should be able to harm relations between two empires to the point where they go to war against each other. But in practice, it seems to take too many consecutive operations to bring this to fruition. I have yet to actually cause a war between two empires trying to do this. If you really want to take out an empire, you're far better off just forming an alliance, making claims, and then going to war with strong fleets. That said, it might be possible if you're playing a very, very small empire to manipulate the galactic powers with these operations. Finally, sabotage starbase facility seems kind of pointless when you consider how many starbases an empire has and how difficult this operation is to perform. For one thing, if you can't acquire an asset to assist with this dice roll, this could take several years to pull off, and then the payoff just doesn't seem worth it. Personally, I'd rather just lay claim to the system, go to war, and take it myself. So, in summary, my personal opinion is that the really important operations are gather information, acquire asset, and extort favors. Prepare sleeper cells is useful if you want to reassign envoys, and arm privateers could be useful in a pinch. The rest of these operations are more style over substance. And that does it for the espionage guide. It seems complicated on the surface, but what it really boils down to is a simple monthly dice roll. If you want to be effective at espionage, then choose civics, leaders, research options, and traditions that boost your empire's code breaking and encoding skills, and then use matching assets for a +4 to your roll. As with a lot of features in Stellaris, this mechanic is more form than function, but it still has its uses. Now go out there and get to spying. I'm Colors Fade, and if you found this video helpful, give it a like, leave questions and comments below, and consider subscribing to my channel. Until next time, happy gaming everyone.